Hi everyone, this is Professor Hall, and we're going to be talking about rhetoric today. So this is something that I chose to do early on in this class, right after your writing sample, because we talk a lot in college composition about how to write an argument. And I have found in teaching how to write an argument, which will come a little bit later on, that sometimes people really need to understand some of the basics of argument and how other people argue. So that's basically what rhetoric is. As you can see from the definition on the screen here, rhetoric is the study and practice of effective communication, the ability to use language effectively, particularly in argument and persuasion. So we're going to take a look at some techniques that people use when they argue, and then I would like you to, for your assignment, to apply the techniques to the readings that I have given to you for this week, or for this unit. So one of the first things that people think about when they argue that I think a lot of students don't consider is audience. And why don't students consider this? Well, it's primarily because they think that their audience is the teacher and that they're writing to the teacher. But really, when people are writing an argument, they think about who is going to be reading it. So things like the gender of their target reader, what their reader's interests are, lifestyle. So things like the job they have, the education that they have, the interests. What kind of behavior do they have when they purchase things? What do they watch on TV? And sometimes, depending on what they're arguing, what's their mobile footprint? So are these people who are using social media? Are they using smart devices? Those kind of things. Why is audience important? Well, I think that the thing to remember about audience is that anybody can pick up an article and read it, right? But there's always a particular group that the author wants to reach. So, for example, with the two I don't know if I'm capturing the whole thing here, but with these two movie posters, Florence Foster Jenkins came out a couple years ago, and so did Sausage Party. My mom, who is 70 years old, said to me, "Oh, Megan, we have to see Florence Foster Jenkins," because that's the target audience, right? There's a particular age, gender, demographic that movie was going for. You can see Meryl Streep. Probably a lot of you haven't heard of this movie. It's about a woman who wanted to be an opera singer but couldn't sing, that's my mom's demographic, right? Older women. The Sausage Party movie is the kind of the opposite of Florence Foster Jenkins. So dirty, kind of crude humor, a little bit funny, a movie that my mother would never go to see. But my younger brother, who's in his 20s, that's definitely his kind of humor, right? So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. That's the intended audience. Anybody can access or read an article, but the intended audience is the group of people that the author hopes will read and respond to the work. So the people that the author has in mind when writing. And some of the things that were on the picture before. Age, education, gender or sexuality, interests, family background, knowledge of the subject area, religious or moral beliefs, political leanings, or occupations. So for example, I have assigned previously an article about, let's say, the homeschooling. If you're reading about homeschooling and there might be an article against homeschooling, and a person's religious beliefs and their political leanings are going to be really important for the author to take in mind. If they're against homeschooling, maybe they're a little bit more liberal, or maybe there's someone who has an educational background where they went through public school and they believe that public school is the best option. That is how that reader could be targeted. If there was an article for homeschooling, a lot of people who have strong religious beliefs are in favor of homeschooling. A lot of people who are a little bit more conservative are in favor of homeschooling or in favor of private schools. So again, that's a place where an author could use that to kind of target it. So they might bring up things that have to do with religion, or they might use religion as one of the reasons for homeschooling. They might talk about how kids sometimes in school get a taste of their teacher's politics, and that would turn some people off. So that would help convince the reader, right? Anything that you can do to help convince your targeted reader, that's basically what you want to take in mind. So before people write, a lot of times, and not so much in this class, but maybe when you're out in the real world, or if you have arguments that you have to write later on, or persuasive pieces, if you're working in media doing advertisements, even if you're in something like culinary and you want to try to get people to eat your food, let's say that that's the case. Are they Brooklyn hipsters who are in their early 20s? Are they looking for a place that has really cool, edgy kind of atmosphere? Or are they family people who come from like, let's say, an Italian background with a lot of kids, right? That's going to be two different types of ads that you would do. And analyzing your audience is important. So who's the recipient? What do they already know about your message? If you can see right there, what do they know or understand? The demographics we talked about, what are their interests? How can you make them interested in your argument? This is sometimes important too, and we'll talk about when we get into writing, having a hook for the beginning of your essay. What's their environment? What are their needs? How can you customize or adjust your message? So determining an author's audience. One of the reasons that this is important is that we are going to be looking at different types of articles and different types of essays. The picture at the top there, Girls' Life and Boys' Life, is showing a very stereotypical, like, two magazines, one for girls, Your Dream Hair, and one for boys about exploring their future. But the level of language is something that we're going to be taking a look at in this class. So we're going to look at some things like you did for your the first article last week, which was a little bit more informal, written for people really, high school or above. Anybody can kind of read it, and it has a very general audience. And then we're going to get into things like peer-reviewed journals, which are there in that picture at the bottom. And I'll talk a little bit more later about what peer-reviewed journals are. They're more academic and professional, whereas things like Time Magazine is a little bit more of a serious paper, but slightly more popular. And then you go all the way to just popular things like TMZ, which is, doesn't have as much weight or seriousness, and it's probably not as well researched. So the tone, we're going to talk about in a second. The tone is the emotions behind the words, and then the purpose is why the author is writing. And in the articles that I gave you for this week, the author is writing to persuade people to believe his or her point of view. So a lay audience, a managerial audience, and an expert audience. You have to kind of know what you're dealing with. Something for a lay audience, these are some examples where they're using Artwave, a type of freeware application. So it's like a free app with in-app purchases or whatever. And they're talking about how you change what you're saying depending on your audience. This is important because as you do research, some things are going to be written for the lay reader, meaning somebody who's not an expert in the subject. So those popular magazines I was just talking about, if we talk about something like homeschooling, they're going to be written for like parents who might be interested, right? Managerial audience is kind of like stepping it up one step. Somebody who's sort of in the business, but maybe they don't know the technical side of things. So, and possibly kind of in the middle for people who are interested and still learning, and written a little bit easier for people who are becoming experts. So if you're looking at something, again, like the homeschool idea, maybe this would be for a teacher who is possibly thinking about teaching in like K-12 or Connections Academy, where they're teaching, but they're teaching to homeschooled kids, right? Somebody who's kind of in the middle. The expert audience is really where things get a lot more technical. So peer-reviewed journals mean that people in the field are reviewing the information, making sure that it's factual, and all that kind of stuff. So if you're talking about homeschool, this would be maybe written by politicians about what the legal requirements would be for someone to homeschool their children, what the data shows in kids who take tests afterwards, so there would be statistical analysis, things like that. So moving on to tone. Tone basically means, if you can look at the picture on the right, the writer's mood, voice, and attitude. How do they feel about the subject? And a lot of times this is an adjective. So cynical, depressed, cheerful, happy, sad, outraged. A lot of times the tone of a piece is harder to determine when you're reading. So you have to really look for words and phrases that indicate how the author feels. I think this is important because a lot of times people will say that their coverage is fair and balanced, and it's really not. It's quite biased. And if you look at the words that they choose, you can kind of tell. So for example, in the past I've assigned an article about breastfeeding in public, and one person might have the headline, outraged mother asked to stop breastfeeding in a bus station, right? Another article might have which has kind of an angry tone, right? I use the word outraged. Another article might have the same news story, but word it differently. So they might say, mother exposes herself while she's breastfeeding in a public place, right? It has a little bit different spin on it. And it kind of might be more shocked than outraged. So by using that word exposed, oh, how dare she be exposed in a public place, right? So here's a first excerpt to talk about tone. This is from the Wall Street Journal, and it's by the co-founder of Zoosk. Zadeh, the co-founder of Zoosk, which is a website, writes, I was born in Urmia, Iran, to a Kurdish middle-class family. Because my hometown sits at the border of Turkey and Iraq, I was exposed to instability and war from an early age. I dreamed of moving away and going and doing something great with my life. Now, what tones and emotions are shown here? I think if you look at the words exposed to instability, dreamed of moving away, doing something great, this shows that he's trying to build sympathy for people who are immigrants. They're exposed to war, they're exposed to instability, they can have a better life here, right? Moving away and doing something great. So he's trying to be inspirational. And who is he talking to? Possibly people who agree with him. If you notice, this is from an article called Bring on More Immigrant Entrepreneurs. So people who think that having immigrant entrepreneurs in our country can help the country to grow. And it also is possible that he's talking to people on the opposite side of the spectrum, people who think that having immigrants hurts the economy or that we should close our borders. But in either case, he's trying to make them think or do or believe. He's trying to make them believe that most people come to the United States with good intentions and that they want a better life, and possibly that the audience should do something about this. So this is another article on the same issue of immigrant population. Federal immigration enforcement policies have been increasingly delegated to state and local jurisdictions, leading to an increased enforcement activities by local police. This has shifted This shift has resulted largely from the implementation of two federal initiatives, Section 287G of the Immigration and Nationality Act, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not going to kind of read the rest, but you can kind of see from this, the level of language is quite a bit higher, right? No significant differences, difference in difference analysis of the matched county data. It has an informative tone. It's just trying to say, if you can kind of get through the technical jargon here at the bottom, there's no significant difference in entry into and adequacy of prenatal care among Hispanic or Latina mothers before and after the implementation of this law. So the law was trying to help people who were pregnant, and before the law and after the law, there was really nothing that changed. But it has a more neutral tone. It's very informative. Who is the intended audience? Probably legislators, people who are making laws. They want to know what laws have been put into place previously. How were those laws helpful, or were they harmful, or like this one, did they do nothing, right? And the prior knowledge people need to read the subject. You have to know what that law 287G of the Immigrant Nationality Act is. You have to have a knowledge of that law, why it was put into place, when it was put into place, all that kind of thing. So when you are doing your own writing, this is kind of important, something to keep in mind. Remembering to explain some things for your audience if they don't know about them already. All right, excerpt 3. This is an excerpt from a speech by Donald Trump. So, our immigration policies serve wealthy corporations. Let me tell you who it does not serve. It does not serve you, working American people. Doesn't serve you. When politicians talk about immigration reform, they usually mean the following: amnesty, open borders, lower wages. Immigration reform should mean something else entirely. It should mean improvement to our laws and policies to make life better for you, our American citizens. Now, if you take a look at this, how many times he kind of repeats things on purpose to get his point across. So the author or the speaker here, because it was our president, he has directly talking to the audience. If you look at number 2, who is the author talking to? Who is the audience? Our immigration policies serve wealthy corporations. Let me tell you who it does not serve. It does not serve you. So let me tell you who it does not serve. It does not serve you, the American people. You are American citizens. So he's trying to make people feel patriotic by talking directly to them. It's actually an interesting rhetorical technique to talk directly to the audience. And what is he trying to make people believe? Well, his argument is pretty clear. The immigration policies right now are there for wealthy corporations. They don't serve the American people. And so immigration reform should not just be about amnesty or open borders. It should make improvements to the laws. Now, what improvements to the laws, he does not say. And he might have that later in the speech. I've just kind of taken an excerpt from it here. But that's basically what he's trying to make people believe. The immigration policies right now are broken and they need to be reformed. I'm the person who can do it. The thing is that when I read it to you, this is an interesting example of tone, because when I read it to you, I don't have the same anger and hostility sometimes that he speaks with, right? Or at least I will say the passion. So if you just read it sort of plainly like you might read it, our immigration policies serve wealthy corporations. Let me tell you who it does not serve. It does not serve you. That's not how it's being said. It's being said like, let me tell you who it doesn't serve. It doesn't serve you. Working American people doesn't serve you. Politicians are wrong, right? So it really, sometimes reading it over, you have to kind of hear it to get the tone. But I think even so, you can see a little bit, doesn't serve you, should mean something else. They're trying to sort of get people riled up. Whereas the first excerpt we looked at, I'm going to go back to it here, on the same subject, moving away. doing something great with my life, right? A lot more calm and inspirational kind of tone. So, I'm going to stop the video right here, and then you can pick it up either today or tomorrow by reading our next video in this series about rhetoric, which is different types of argument. But I hope that you have seen a little bit better how people use purpose and tone to create their argument, and how those techniques can be persuasive.